Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome participants, welcome judges, and we have a few attendees watching as well. So we're going to get started here on our presentation. So the recording is already in progress. I'll give a little intro speech, and then delegates, you'll be free to begin your presentation. So I want to welcome you all to our JDC West 2022 Business Technology Case presentation and give a huge thank you to our judges for being here with us today, Justin Funk, Lawrence Lazarco, Chris Hocus, David Franklin, and Daniel Miguel. So competitors, as you know, you'll have a maximum of 20 minutes to present, and immediately following that presentation, the judges will have a total of 5 minutes to ask the presenters questions, and I will be moderating those questions with the raise hand function. Competitors, you'll see Zoom chat notifications at various intervals, and those will appear in the chat to indicate the remaining time, and any speaker who continues to speak after that maximum time limit will be stopped. No questions or comments will be permitted from the audience, and all judges are asked to have their microphones muted during the presentation. The audience is banned from any material with a naming convention that bears the name or symbol of a competing university, and we ask that the audience leave the Zoom call immediately following the presentation. Judges, please stay on the call until I advise you to move to the next call. Competitors, at this time, I'll ask that one of you can share the screen, and you may begin your presentation, and I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
You wake up one morning and receive an unexpected call from your best friend from work. She says the news outlets everywhere are reporting a worldwide virus outbreak. You pinch yourself thinking, what is this strange nightmare? Well, little did you know that this was indeed real life, and that the 2 years that succeeded the call would be followed by months of isolation, social distancing, and anxiety. What do you crave to relieve the stress? Connection that heals. Good morning, my name is Celia, and today I'm joined with my colleagues from Epiphany Consulting, Dorsa and Justin, and we are excited to present to you our Find Your Path and Keep Your Place strategy to figure out how you can leverage technology and orient your startup for growth and best cater to the growing pains that people around the world are experiencing due to pandemic-induced isolation. The key objective we have for you today is to develop a technology strategy to establish a foundation for innovation and long-term business growth. We've categorized our analyses into the short-term, medium-term, and long-term, with the first key question being, how do you meet technology expectations to manage future growth? Secondly, how do you optimize user experience to meet consumer needs? And lastly, how do you differentiate your offerings to compete in the market? We bring forward the Find Your Path, Keep Your Place strategy with how to prepare, how to survive, and how to win. With how to prepare, we recommend using MS Azure hybrid cloud solution to increase storage capabilities and secure data. How to survive with implementing an AI matching algorithm. And lastly, how to win by utilizing gamification and introducing a new in-game app. The impact we expect to achieve is net benefits of $1.24 million in cost savings and net profits by 2027. Now, diving straight into our analysis, as a young startup looking to make its way in a competitive market, you need to have a long-term focus in mind to understand where you're headed in order to figure out how technology is even going to help you meet your goals. Well, where you're at right now is at 300,000 app users, and you're growing very quickly, but you have an uncertain strategic direction. But you do know that where you want to be is a market leader, the next Bumble. But for this, you need to identify a sustainable competitive advantage. Now let's bridge the gap. How are you going to get to where you want to be? Well, the first step is to align your technology strategy to set that foundation in order for you to support and enable business growth. Secondly, meet market expectations to survive in the industry. And lastly, figure out how to differentiate yourselves, figure out how to win, to ultimately arrive at your desired state.
Now let's take a look at the short-term key questions that we addressed in the summary. So first, with the limited data storage capabilities, why is it inhibiting your business growth? You have off-premise data coming in from your users to your on-premise databases with 1 gigabyte per user limitations. From this, with the increase in volume that you did not anticipate, it's leading to the rapid business growth that's leading to insufficient storage. From this, the response is going to be deleting old data that can be beneficial to your business or users, or employees having to scramble to respond to service notifications. The business implication of this is frustrated stakeholders, from users to shareholders to frustrated employees internally. Now, the key takeaway here is that your user base is growing quickly and you have to have the storage capabilities to meet that growth. If you don't, you will risk inconvenient customer experience, missing revenue growth opportunities, and overworking your employees as they try to mitigate these issues. And why is it critical to have these secured stored data from the users? Well, let's take a look at some industry expectations. From 2020 to 2021, there's been a 31% increase in cyber attacks for companies. And these key risk factors can be anything from financial risk to environmental risks that impact you. And it's seen that users in North America, across with other countries, believe that it's the OS provider's responsibility to keep user data safe. Now let's take a look at a case study for ashleymadison.com. Here, hackers were able to target AM due to their fraudulent data security practices. They were able to breach over 30 million plus users' data. And because of this, it was due to the inadequate authentication process that they had, the encryption keys that were clearly identifiable, and the personal information that was retained, even though they had promised their users it would be destructed after the users deleted their files. The implications of this were over millions of dollars in class action lawsuits and fees that had to be paid to the Federal Trade Commission. And additionally, this lingered, and there was persistent ransomware attacks for over 5 years after the attack took place. The key takeaway here is that when you have large amounts of personal information like this, information security is critical, and not having it is inadmissible. Finders Keepers has an ethical responsibility to provide users the data protection they need.
Fundamental medium-term issue that threatens Finders Keepers' ability to survive in its market is its limitation to its geolocation algorithm feature. Specifically, this has significantly impacted your three customer segments of friend makers, network individuals, and of course, love seekers, whose user journey we have displayed right here. Users usually start off by updating their profile, developing it, and saying, hey, okay, this is a standard process. Again, they then begin swiping, only to realize that although they are close, individuals are not their type. They keep swiping and swiping after hours and hours. They become frustrated, at which point they realize that maybe online dating is just not right for me. Online networking is just not right for me. And from that point on, they close the app and simply turn to competitors with better offerings and higher services. The key takeaway here is that geolocation data is not sufficient to determine what kind of people your users want to meet. If your users are not showing profiles that better match their preferences, they will leave for other dating apps where they can better expect more tailored profiles.
Now, moving on to our long-term focus, we want to answer the question, how do you differentiate your offerings to compete in the market? By first understanding what opportunities exist. So we've analyzed the competitive landscape against 2 dimensions: degree of user experience innovation and users seeking meaningful connections. And we identified a gap in this market. The key takeaway here is that there's a market opportunity to differentiate your app as highly innovative and cater towards users focused on finding and keeping meaningful relationships. Now, articulating this further, the target segment we recommend is targeting users who value innovative user experience, those of people of ages 22 to 40 who are tech savvy, and again, focus on finding those long-term meaningful relationships. Now, how does this translate into more tangible user profiles? We'd like you to meet Rebecca. She's 22 years old and she's using your dating app function, and she's looking for her first serious relationship. As a result, one of her pain points is getting to know someone better beyond just their appearance, which is what a lot of other apps are just offering. Next, we'd like you to meet Rachel. She is 29 years old and she's using your app to develop professional connections. And so what she's looking for are meaningful connections, and her pain point is finding those long-term mutually beneficial relationships as opposed to shallow connections. Lastly, meet Rick. He's 38 years old and he's using your app to find friends. He lost touch with his friends during the pandemic, so he's looking for new people to connect with to provide emotional support. And so his pain point is having those deep conversations to develop meaningful, deep connections. The key takeaway here is that although each type of customer uses your app for a different purpose, they all share one common pain point. leveraging the human advantage by developing deep, meaningful connections to heal anxieties and stress.
Now let's take a look at your alternatives for your data storage solution. So first, we have looked at on-premise, co-location, and different cloud offerings that are available to your company. The criteria that we have used is ease of scalability as you're a startup with changing IT demand. There's also low cost requirements and reduced need for in-house talent due to the small resource, and level of cybersecurity risk due to the level of data that we're dealing with. Based on this, on-premise data has a high risk as it requires high human capital and resources to manage. This is also true for co-location. When we take a look at the cloud offerings, there's lower risk and lower reward with private cloud as there's increased data protection due to it being private, but there's still sufficient in-house resources required to maintain it. Taking a look at public cloud, it's higher risk with low reward as it does not require high resources, but it exposes the business to cloud data breaches. And then we have the hybrid cloud, lower risk, higher reward, does not require high resources, but can still help your startup make a transition to the cloud at your own pace. Now, with this alternative being discussed and our key issues, let's take a look at the recommendations. So first, starting with our short term, how to prepare, how to use Microsoft Azure hybrid cloud solution to increase your storage capabilities and have cost savings of around $300,000 annually. First, starting with Microsoft Azure to help you make the transition to cloud at your own pace with established professionals. Microsoft Azure has best practices and supports startups beginning their cloud journey. You'll be able to allocate your data with on-premise data being structured and unstructured data on the cloud. And the benefits of this are the security due to the enterprise standard security measures, the flexibility of allocating different environments, and lastly, the one-stop shop of being able to utilize the familiar Microsoft infrastructure. Technology infrastructure from what we looked at previously would have the cloud added for the off-premise and on-premise. We would see that there's storing unstructured data in the cloud for the unstructured file server. We would then use a cluster structure for data synchronization and increase reliability. And there would also be a software firewall to increase the security while minimizing costs for your business. The key takeaway here is that now that you've created this hybrid cloud solution and you're able to store the user data, it's really important to focus on the cyber ethics that are involved with this as well. So looking at a defense strategy to protect your information security, you need to look internally and externally. Internally, using our case study with Ashley Madison, of course, it's learning to encrypt the data and make sure you prevent attackers from accessing the data. Access control and establishing data policy to promote that cybersecurity culture. Externally, it would be gaining consent from users and making sure there's transparency, requesting authentication, and data destruction guaranteed when they ask to have their data and profile deleted.
Next, we look at a solution of how you can best survive in the medium term, and that's by implementing an AI matching algorithm to meet user expectations. By inputting data such as profiles, interests, characteristics that are preferred by users, and historic swiping behavior, AI is not only able to create tailored matching suggestions for users, but is also able to develop holistic data sets, analytics for customers and consumers and companies as an external source of income. With that, we suggest Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services compared to its competitors such as AWS. Cognitive Services is a budget-friendly option that is not only compatible with your company's existing storage and system, but also has a high ease of implementation due to Microsoft's support team. Knowing that, how will this AI system work? First, we look back at Rebecca, our dating candidate. Upon using the app, a request is sent to her for data collection consent. When accepted, Rebecca begins to input her information as it's recorded in the Finders Keeper system. From here, Azure Cognitive Services processes the collected data for higher potential matches, resulting in, of course, happier users whose information will be recorded for future algorithms in the future. From that point on, the system can also produce reports, analytics from the overall collected data to sell to external companies as the added source of income. With the solution, our consumers will no longer feel frustrated over developing unmeaningful relationships or repeated denials. In fact, with AI, swipes on the app will now have an increased likelihood to identify your user's desired audience through just a few attempts, thanks to AI's ability to self-learn. This ultimately minimizes the time used and frustration users have to experience when hunting for new connections, ultimately increasing user retention and overall satisfaction.
Now, looking at the long term, how to win. By utilizing gamification and introducing a new in-app game to drive connection to achieve a net profit of $471,000 by 2027. Now, how can you help your users develop more meaningful relationships? Well, we're seeing booming opportunities and trends in gamification. The projected CAGR for this industry is 27.4% over the next few years. And we've also seen that gamification is successful in your particular industry with case studies from Tinder and Bumble. With, for example, Tinder's Swipe Night, they found 26% increase in matches and also a 20 million user turnout. So the key takeaway here is, how can you capitalize on the fastest growing trend, gamification, to help your users develop more meaningful relationships? Well, we recommend introducing a new in-app game, Keepers Dig Deeper. Now, what will this look like? It will be an in-app game available through your messaging and video call feature. And the premise is to select get to know you prompts of varying levels of depth to stimulate conversation. And the goal is to help your users through making meaningful connections in a fun way by facilitating conversation. And also this is an opportunity for a new revenue stream by offering a premium model. So you can offer a free basic card pack. And if users want to explore more prompts and they run out, they can spend $5 extra for the extended card pack. And we've also seen that this idea has seen success elsewhere in the world. We've seen a proof of concept from We're Not Really Strangers card game, which this idea is inspired by. And this game blew up online and became viral, and they grew millions of fans and followers around the world. So how does this game work? You start the game by letting users open the feature through more options, and then they can choose how to play with or without video. And then they would select a prompt from three categories of card piles of varying levels of depth. And then they answer questions back and forth. And then once they're done, they can end at any time, or the game automatically stops when they run out of cards.
Now, you may be wondering, we are a small startup with limited resources. How can we implement these recommendations feasibly? First off, we recognize the need to hire personnel to man these recommendations. Given your workforce of currently 9 individuals, we recommend hiring 2 teams: the IT operations team, who will be in charge of executing your move to the cloud, and the innovative offerings team, who will execute the AI integration and implement the Keepers Dig Deeper game. With how we can best move our operations to the cloud, we've established a compact 4-month implementation timeline to reflect the urgent need for your company to fulfill your customer needs and wants of having more storage. With this timeline, we are prioritizing the development phase, running a number of evaluations at the functional test, assessment, security assessment, compliance review, and user acceptance phase. The rationale behind this is because we want to prioritize user privacy and cyber management in order to mitigate the potential long-term risks that your company may incur from not taking these actions. Our milestones here, of course, include deploying the cloud solution by Q3 in 2022 and attaining a 99.99% system reliability and availability. With how we can best implement our AI matching algorithm, we have once again prioritized the development phase, with priority being placed in the testing and integration, as well as the beta testing phase. The rationale behind this is due to the ethical issue of potential biased data, as well as flawed algorithms, to ensure that the system is not discriminatory and that the AI algorithm is wholly inclusive. We will be prioritizing these phases and developing the functional AI algorithm by Q2 of 2023, as well as increasing matches by 10% during the beta test as an evaluation point, and ultimately increasing the connections by 23% upon launch in Q4 2024. Finally, we have a long-term timeline towards how we can implement the Keepers Dig Deeper game in order for your company to establish a competitive advantage. Here, we have placed priorities and emphasized on the functional testing and beta testing phase, as we wish to maintain the privacy of your user answers on Keeper Digs Deeper, as we do acknowledge that user privacy and data privacy is of utmost importance, especially in an online dating scenario. Through here, we are aiming to deploy the in-app game by Q3 2024 and ultimately have 78,000 in-app users by Q3 of 2025. And of course, with all recommendations, there are costs based on a sensitivity analysis under a 90% confidence interval that identifies a 8.7% compounded annual growth in the dating service market. We see that our first recommendation specifically, will yield approximately a $520,000 cost savings, while our second and third recommendation will result in an $860,000 net profit in 2027. Through this, a few of our cost drivers, of course, include our integration partners, employees required to run this project, and of course, user acquisition as highlighted in your brief.
When taking a look at some of the risks and the mitigation strategies identified, the first is employees breaching sensitive information through remote access. The mitigation for this would be to provide policy sign-offs and promote cybersecurity culture through your cybersecurity lead and training opportunities. Second, it's data embedded in the AI algorithm being susceptible to bias. There would be an established in-loop process with monthly human checkups to validate this process as mitigation. And lastly, users would have hesitancy to play a game that requires them to be vulnerable with strangers due to the lack of trust and uncertainty. The mitigation for this would be to implement in-app messages to promote the chat game version and tier 1 prompts.
To summarize, with our Find Your Path and Keep Your Place strategy, you will be able to set that tech foundation to make growth possible, make strides towards establishing yourself in an untapped market, and ultimately help your users build connections that heal. Thank you, and we'll now open the floor to any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, participants. And I will now begin the question period, starting with Chris.
So one of my questions here, you got the medium term yielding quite a bit of net profit, and I'm struggling to understand the tie-in between, a key point in that journey is data entry. Like a lot of the stuff that you're entering into these, the AI is going to be dependent on user entry. And so what are you going to do to mitigate the risks of just not getting legitimate data? If you look at all these dating apps that have like 50 questions, 100 questions, yeah, that's great to tailor that experience, but what about the ones that really don't care about any of that? So how are you going to really equate 291K net profit by that timeline based on like assuming that they're going to enter all that data? Can you just kind of dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in addition to collecting data from their user profile, a major input source of data is going to be from their activity. And so this includes what they do on the app, what features they are drawn to, as well as whether they swipe left or right on certain profiles to figure out how they rank or prioritize different characteristics. So that's going to be a major data input source that's going to be really valuable.
Next question will come from David.
Thank you. So you've talked about monetizing big data. What are your concerns and how would you address the ethics around that with your clients or users?
Absolutely. When it comes to data, one of the most important facts is user privacy, especially when it's going from businesses to consumers. That's what they're worried about, especially with this digital age. With that, it would be having that open transparency with them about how their data is being used, where it's being stored, and what you would be using the data for. And this would have them be allowed to opt in and opt out and be able to approach it the way with acknowledgement. And there would also be an opportunity for them to delete their profile should they ask, and there would be a guarantee of that being deleted and destructed with their data.
Awesome. Next question from Lawrence, please.
Are your short and medium term strategy, are you continuing to roll out features and improvements to the application, or are you really focused on the stability, security, and AI components?
In the short term, we are focusing on the AI and cybersecurity as we have identified them to be core competencies and wants from our customers. Knowing that after these features have been implemented, these can be long-term recommendations that will undergo changes for further innovation and to further tailor to our audience.
Next question from Justin.
Just curious, given our explosive growth right now, that is even surprising us, why did this revenue get so flat? It looks like in perpetuity after 2025.
Yeah, and that's mainly due to the fact that we are still relying on the sale of user data. As we slowly rotate to the freemium model, in which we will be gaining revenues from our third recommendation, we are expecting to increase revenues over time once this 2027 period has eclipsed.
Are there any other questions from our judges? Daniel.
So on the cloud solutions, I've seen only Microsoft Azure. Just wanted to make sure that you took into consideration other platforms as well, or did you find any meaningful? Okay.
Yeah, we actually looked into Amazon as well as Google and developing something in-house as the options. We decided ultimately based on the criteria of their familiarity and experience with hybrid cloud, the cost and integration support and security measures that would be provided to go forward with Microsoft Azure over the other cloud offerings.
Thank you.
We do have time for about one more question, judges, if you have. But if not, that's okay too. All right, looks like no. So at this time, we will close off the question period. Thank you so much, delegates, for your presentation. This does officially conclude the presentation. So we would just ask that attendees and delegates, you may now leave the presentation, and judges, you can stick around for a couple of minutes.
So much. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.